Hello everyone. In this video, I'll give a complete explanation on how to kill Solak. I will cover all the rules, I'll cover all the mechanics, and I'm going to give a number of tips on how you can improve your Solak kills if you have a little bit of experience. Finally, we'll cover how much money and how rare the drops are at Solak. This is going to be a very long video. However, I do have a quick guide on how to do this boss in the YouTube channel as well. Click on the link down below if you want to go to that instead. It's important to note before we get too far along in this video that this is not a video on how to optimally kill Solak. This is just a video explaining every mechanic and a few recommended ways to deal with them. I do not try to get Solak kills as fast as possible, I just try to get reliable kills. So, some of what I suggest here may disagree with what you may have been taught or what other people may suggest, and that's okay. The way I try to do Solak, as long as everyone's getting a kill, I'm happy. And that's the way this video will work too. In this video, we will cover what to bring, how to get to Solak, the mechanics, how to base tank at Solak. I'll give some additional tips, and then we'll cover the loot, including the average drop value and the rare drop rates. Feel free to comment down below if you feel I missed something, or if you have any questions about Solak. Let's begin. So who exactly is Solak? Solak is, lore-wise, the guardian of the Lost Grove. The Lost Grove is a relatively new area in RuneScape that has a bunch of high-level Slayer mobs, and Solak was assigned a long time ago to protect this area. Now, eventually, a bunch of elves were sent to help Solak protect this area. Marithiel is one of the good elves, however, another elf named Aristor decided that he wanted to corrupt Solak's mind and take the power of the Lost Grove for himself. So, when the player, you, gets to Solak, your job is to free Solak from the corruption that Aristor has put upon him. So, you technically don't actually kill Solak. All you do, whenever you win this boss encounter, is you have re-purified Solak, so to speak. Now, in the actual fight, Solak has 4 phases. He has a varying amount of HP, depending on the team size, but he was actually made for between 2 and 7 players. Technically, there are some players who have managed to kill Solak even solo, but they actually fought Solak in a duo mode difficulty. The largest group you can have is 7 players. You cannot bring more than 7 players into the fight. Solak has very low defense, so you should rarely splash on Solak, if ever. However, his auto attacks are very strong, so you may find you have some trouble dealing with a significant amount of damage from his auto attacks, especially if you are a base tank. Finally, there is a lot of mechanics to this boss, so you may mess up a few of them. If that happens, just keep going. Don't give up on the kill just because something went wrong, especially initially. Also, you're pretty likely to make a mistake with a boss this complex at first, so don't give up. It won't be easy, but I'm sure you'll be able to do it. Here's a bare minimum you should bring to your first Solak kill. Overloads, 5 super restores or prayer potions, a shield, the best gear of your chosen style, some and brews, food, even more food, this time in your yak or your pack mammoth, and then also bring some patience because you'll definitely need to try this a few times. At least, you'll likely have to try this a few times. There are more items that are helpful to get you kills, however, they are actually not nearly as necessary as what I'm mentioning here. Such as a Ring of Death, to significantly reduce the costs of your death, especially if you have high level gear, Dominion Mines to help do damage to the volatile routings, Bladed Dive Switch to be able to move around the arena more quickly, and especially to be able to pick up pads on phase 1 more easily. Power Burst of Vitality in case you or some teammates make some mistakes. Adrenaline Potions, a flanking switch to increase your DPS, ring switches to increase your DPS or to give you better luck, or to save money on death costs, such as Ring of Death, and then any other DPS increasing stuff that you have. Here are the abilities that your character should have access to when fighting Solak. Stunning abilities to deal with the Bleed on phase 3 and the Rain Bomb on phase 4. Resonance to defend against a number of mechanics. A few more defensive abilities to defend against some mechanics. A DPS boosting ultimate ability to do extra damage throughout the fight and especially on the last phase. Secondary action button should be enabled and you should know where to use it. If you've done a boss like Raksha or Karapak, you will have used this secondary action button. Surge and or Bladed Dive to deal with phase 1 pads and to move across the arena as you may need. And then Anticipation and Freedom to deal with stunning attacks. Now, let's cover how to get to Solak. The first way to get to Solak is actually just by walking there. To get there, you just need to find your way to the Poison Waste and run south of it until you find a sandstone. You click on the sandstone and you're going to get teleported to the Lost Grove, after which you run north and arrive at Solak. You should bring 5 Bittercap mushrooms with you so that you can fix the fairy ring code next to Solak in order to make it back the next time. You should not regularly do this method, but this is a way you can do it, at least initially, to get to Solak for your first time. Don't regularly use this method because it takes a little bit. The next way is to use the fairy ring. So if you repaired the fairy ring next to Solak using the Bittercap mushrooms, you can teleport to the fairy ring network however you normally would, and then input the code BJS into the fairy ring, and it will teleport you next to Solak. The easiest way to actually get to Solak if you've never killed him before is actually to use the Max Guild. All you need to do is reattune your PVM portal in your Max Guild to Solak and then walk through it. If you have actually already gotten a kill at Solak before, the best option is to use the War's Retreat portal. All you need to do is reattune one of your War's Retreat portals to Solak and then teleport through it. This will not work if you have never killed Solak before, however. Finally, you by yourself or your whole team can teleport directly here by using the grouping system. Everyone in the group must be on the same world, have hit the ready button, and do not have an interface open and are not in combat. If all of this is satisfied, your group leader will be able to complete group and then choose the option to teleport team members, bringing you right next to Solak. There are 2 roles when fighting Solak: the base tank and the DPS role. Generally, if you have some learners, they're only going to be the DPS role because the base tank role is somewhat harder. It's important to note that if everyone's a learner, the most experienced person should probably take the base tank role, as you are going to be responsible for many things that the DPS players will not be responsible for. It's important to note that for a number of mechanics in the first 3 phases of this boss, everyone should just stop attacking to deal with the mechanics. I've seen many players get killed because either they tried too hard to do too much damage or something else and messed up the mechanics, thus sometimes even failing to kill. So, don't over-prioritize DPS. It's important, but it's more important to make sure you deal with the mechanics correctly, even if you don't get to do any damage for it. I'll start by covering what you do as the DPS role in this boss. Now, Solak will always attack you with ranged. However, the ranged attacks do not hit you instantly. they will take some time to travel between Solak and you. So, if you're further away, you may actually find that the range hits you after someone who is much closer. Now, there is 4 phases to cover. Let's get started. I actually think Phase 1 is the hardest phase if you're new to this boss, because he has the most mechanics that can actually kill you very quickly. Here are the mechanics you'll face on Phase 1. The pads, the root spawns, the personal roots, lashers, but they don't always happen, bomb 1, bomb 2, and then the arms, legs, and core. Important to note, Solak will only do the arms, legs, and core mechanic as soon as he reaches HP cap on Phase 1. However, you will have to resolve any mechanics that are currently outstanding at the time. Your team's objective on Phase 1 is to kill the core, which is a secondary HP bar under Solak. If your team can do this, you will move on to Phase 2. The first mechanic we'll cover is also probably the most dangerous mechanic. This is the pads. Every single player on your team will get a pad that spawns on the arena. Everyone needs to go and choose a pad and stand in it. For every pad that a team member is not standing in, it's going to explode after a certain amount of time and do around 4,000 damage to your teammates. This can get very dangerous in large groups, as potentially 2 or even 3 or 4 pads can blow up, potentially killing everyone on the team. I recommend that the newer players choose the pads first, and the players that have more experience and or have bladed dive available choose the pads afterwards. During this time, the priority is to stay on the pads. Don't attack Solak if he's out of range, because it's more important that the rest of your team does not take a big pile of damage from a pad explosion. If you see that your team is going to miss at least one pad, you can actually use Resonance after about 5 seconds of the pads being on the field, and most likely you'll be able to get a pretty decent heal. If you see a lot of pads that are likely to be missed, you'll most likely have to use your Power Burst of Vitality here to tank a very large amount of damage. You can use any number of other defensive abilities as well. After the green markers or the pads disappear, everyone on the team is going to get a second adrenaline bar. When the second adrenaline bar fills up, it's going to do an explosion that does between 7,000 and 10,000 damage. However, if you did not stand in one of the pads, it will do even more than that, potentially one shot killing whoever had this explosion. There are a few ways of dealing with this mechanic. If you miss one of the green pads before this adrenaline bar appeared, you're going to take substantially more damage when the bar fills up than if you didn't miss one of the green pads. So, if you miss one of the green pads, make sure you use some defensive abilities because you will probably die otherwise. The easiest way is to use Devotion followed by Resonance. Devotion will prevent any of Solak's auto attacks from trying to snipe your Resonance, which you use to defend against a big hit. You can also use Disruption Shield and Resonance close to the time the bar is about to fill up. You can use Resonance or Disruption Shield before the bar fills up and before a range hit hits you if you're further than 3 squares from Solak. And if you are less than 3 squares from Solak, you can use Disruption Shield or Resonance the tick after Solak hits you with a ranged attack. Now, if you're planning on timing your Resonance or Disruption Shield very well, make sure you're on a world that does not give you significant ping issues, because if this happens, you may miss your Resonance or Disruption Shield timing anyway because of ping. Also, you have to be tick perfect with this, or you are 100% going to take a very large amount of damage. At around 35 seconds into the kill, Solak will spawn 8 volatile rootings around the arena. They will have a varying HP depending on the amount of players on the team. The chart will show you. Now, the roots have quite high defense, so it's actually possible to splash on them, but they are weak to Dominion Mines. If your base tank has lured Solak far enough away, you can actually attack these roots with Soul Split. My teams generally attack the roots a little bit later, at 50 seconds. However, if you want to kill the roots earlier, there is nothing wrong with it. Sometime later, maybe even while you're attacking the volatile rootings, 2 players on your team will get personal roots. The players who get personal roots will get a message on their screen with a countdown timer. The countdown timer actually counts down in ticks, not seconds, which is a little confusing. But one player will get a 15-tick timer, and one player will get a 9-tick timer. When the timer counts down, roots will spawn from the arrow that is on the map to wherever the player that got the root message is. These roots do a huge amount of damage. It's very, very easy to get killed by them. They do about 2,500 damage per tick, and they stun whoever they reach. To defend against this mechanic, the players that actually get the root message need to run towards the arrow that is on their map at the edge of the arena as fast as possible, and then use anticipation in the last 5 or so ticks, or freedom, and then run away from the arrow on the last couple ticks. If there's actually no one between the root's arrow and the players themselves, then they can actually go as far as they like, as long as there's no risk to them or any other players. However, if you do have players near you, try to let them know somehow that you have roots coming from an area that is close to them so that your other teammates will know to get out of the way. Now, if you don't get this message, that means roots are not going to spawn towards you, but you can still get hit by your teammates' roots. What you should do is if you see some player running quickly towards one area for no clear reason, then most likely they have roots. So run away. If you don't actually know how to tell, then just run towards the middle, and that is probably the safest place, as the people who do get the roots most likely will not be able to put the roots through the middle. Regardless of whether you got a message for the roots or not, if you get caught by the roots, free them immediately and then run perpendicular to the direction of the roots and eat at the same time. I cannot guarantee that you'll survive this mechanic. Sometimes you'll just be unlucky and you'll die. Eventually, after the personal roots have finished up, any remaining volatile rootings that are still alive might turn into lashers. Any lashers that spawn immediately heal any adjacent roots to full HP. So basically, if your team takes too long to kill the volatile rootings, some of them will turn into lashers. If this happens, you just kill the lashers as soon as possible. Stuns are preferred because it prevents the lashers from doing strong ranged attacks. After the lashers spawn, if they do, eventually, every player on the team except the base tank will have bombs 1 and then bomb 2 spawn on them. Every player who gets one of these bombs will have an adrenaline bar above their head. When the adrenaline bar fills up, both the player and any other players that are within roughly 5 squares of them will take around 4,000 damage. If you get this bomb, step away from your teammates and use resonance. After the first hit, the second hit comes very shortly after, and you will not be able to use resonance in time. Stay away from your teammates for this one too. However, you can also use another defensive ability such as Reflect or Debilitate or even use Disruption Shield. Or you can actually just tank this hit, because by the time that this explosion happens, Solak will have moved on to the next mechanic. And around the time that the second bomb is about halfway through, Solak will start the arms, legs, and core mechanic. The arms and the legs must be killed before the bar that is above them fills up. If this does not happen, Solak is going to immediately get up, start attacking everyone on the team, do a large amount of damage, and spawn 2 Lashers. You do not want this to happen. Many teams will teleport out if this happens. During the arms, legs, and core mechanic, Solak will never attack you, which means you can praise Soul Split to heal all the way to full HP if you want. You want to, if you can, save your DPS a little bit on the arms and legs because you don't need to do too much DPS as long as your team is doing okay. And try to dump your DPS on the core, as killing the core is the ultimate progress towards moving on to the next phase. Be sure, if you see that your team is lagging behind on DPS, to do more damage though, as it is far more important to make sure you get the arms and legs down and not do as much damage to the core than it is to fail the arms and legs. Unless you kill the core, Solak will not progress onto Phase 2. Eventually, after a certain amount of time, Solak will bring the core back in, and he'll restart his rotation back from the pads, and then the root spawns, and then the personal roots, and then potential lashers, and then bombs 1 and 2 again, and then arms linking into core again. However, if you get Solak to his HP cap before any of these mechanics, Solak will skip straight ahead past all the mechanics towards the arms, legs, and core mechanic again. Which actually means if Solak is close to HP cap, your team just needs to DPS Solak until they get him to the HP cap, and then deal with the arms, legs, and core mechanic. Once again, don't forget to deal with any outstanding mechanics that happen just before Solak reaches HP cap. So for example, if you see any paths, your team still has to deal with those. If your team sees roots, your team will still have to deal with those, or any bombs, same thing. Let's explain what you will actually be doing throughout the fight. Everyone on the team will do as much damage as they can until the pads spawn. After the pads spawn, everyone on the team will run towards their pads and wait until the pads disappear. Then they'll defend against the pad explosion that's coming up, however they would like, and then continue to attack Solak. At around 35 seconds, the roots will spawn. Not all teams will actually attack the roots at this time. At 50 seconds, though, your team will attack the roots. Later on, Solak will spawn the personal roots, so everyone who gets the roots runs towards their arrow and then deals with a stun and runs away from the roots. And then everyone else runs away from those players or to the middle. After that, your teammates will get bombs 1 and 2. They resist the first one and then stay away from your teammates still for the second one. And then they kill the arms, legs, and core. Do as much damage to the core as they can. And then eventually, we're going to repeat this process until Solak gets to his HP cap. In which case, Solak's only going to do the arms, legs, and core. So your team will just kill the arms and legs and do as much damage as they can to the core until they move on to Phase 2. Generally, your team should be able to kill the core in 2 cycles, however, it is okay if it takes a few more than that. After your team kills the core on Phase 1 from Solak, Solak moves on to Phase 2. Phase 2 has actually a lot of mechanics. There's the stacks of cleansing, the anima eruptions, there's the middle itself, the jumping bombs, the rain and shield, an arm climb, a second rain and shield, a tornado, there's a bombs 1, Solak's melee roots, bombs 2, and then actually what Solak is going to do is restart from the jumping bombs again. On Phase 2, there is actually 2 objectives. The first one is to kill the storm, and that's the first one you're going to complete if your team wishes to. It's actually possible to get a Solak kill without killing the storm. As a matter of fact, most world record Solak kills would involve not killing the storm. However, that is very, very dangerous. So, I highly recommend killing the storm. The second objective, which you definitely need to pass in order to move on to phase 3 is get the percentage bar down to 0%. There are a few things that reduce the percentage at the top of the HP bar. Jumping bombs, which reduce a little bit. DPSing, which reduces a very significant amount of its percentage. Rain, successful arm climbs, and the tornado also reduce a pretty significant amount of its percentage. As soon as enough of these things happen, Solak will get to 0% and move on to phase 3. First, let's talk about the stacks and cleansing mechanic. There's really two major things about this. The stacks themselves, and then cleansing. The middle of phase 2 is actually very dangerous. You want to stay out of this as much as possible. Every couple seconds, your character inside the middle will take a blight hit for about 1500 damage and add a stack. Which means, if you're too long in the middle, your character gains stacks and takes damage very quickly. My opinion is that you should stay out of the middle as much as you can. If you're in the middle, surge out of it as fast as you can, and if you need to get to the other side of the arena, do not go through the middle, go around the middle. The stacks themselves have only one serious effect throughout the whole fight, and that is Solak does 1% more damage to you per stack that your character has. There's a few ways to gain stacks on phase 2, and there's actually a few on phase 3, but I won't cover these yet. On phase 2, when you start, every player will already have 5 stacks. Standing in the middle gains stacks very, very, very rapidly. Every single blight hit you take inside the middle will increase a stack. Also, every storm explosion when your players are down will give every player a stack as well. Now, you can always reset the amount of stacks you have to 0 by cleansing. To cleanse, you click on Marithiel, and Marithiel will spawn a green light right in front of her, to the south center of the arena. Standing in this green light eventually will reset your stacks down to 0 when it disappears. So if your character shows up at the last moment, and then the green light disappears, but your character was in the green light for a brief moment at the end, then your character will get its stacks reset. This can be done at any point from phase 2 at the start onwards to the very end of the kill. There is a short cooldown between when you can cleanse and then re-cleanse. So if someone does miss a cleanse, then they might have to wait maybe around 30 seconds before they can cleanse again. Generally, your team should try to cleanse together. Now let's cover the storm. It causes periodic explosions that do about 2000 damage to everyone on the team. These explosions also add 1 blight stack to everyone who takes damage from them. Now, you will be able to go up on the Anima Eruptions to actually attack the storm. Every time you click on the storm will take 10,000 damage minus 1,000 damage times the amount of stacks you have. So, if you have, say, 4 stacks, the storm will take 6,000 damage, and if you have, say, 14 stacks, the storm will heal by 4,000 health. When you go up enough times, you'll be able to eventually deal enough damage to the storm to finally kill it. When this happens, the storm will simply disappear, and there will no longer be any more of these periodic explosions that do about 2,000 damage to the team. At the start of phase 2, 4 Anima Eruptions will spawn in each corner of the arena. A northwest one, a northeast one, a southwest one, and a southeast one. When killing an Anima Eruption, the Anima Eruption will leave behind a blue light that, if a character stands in there, will suddenly lift your character high in the air, giving you an opportunity to attack the storm. This doesn't happen immediately. The blue light will stay on the field for a few seconds, and then any players that are still in the blue light at the end of that period will be lifted up and given an opportunity to attack the storm if it's there. Generally, all the team will try to go up on at least one of these blue lights in order for everyone on the team to have an opportunity to do damage to the storm. After your team generally kills the storm though, your team still has to kill the remaining anima eruptions or you will not be able to progress further in Phase 2. After killing these anima eruptions, you will be able to move on to Phase 2. Your team will no longer need to go up, assuming the storm is dead at this point. Solak cannot attack anybody who has went up through these eruptions, which means if anyone is still on the ground and the base tank went up, then Solak will actually change aggro to whoever did not go up instead. After all the anima eruptions are dead, a little bit later, Solak will do the jumping bombs. He's going to spawn a huge pile of jumping bombs around the arena that will fairly continue to spawn in random locations around the arena in many waves. Each subsequent wave becomes more and more powerful, with the initial bombs hitting around 1,000 damage, but the later bombs hitting even up to 7,000 damage. Blast radius of these bombs is about 3 squares, so if your team sees any jumping bombs, move away from them at least 3 squares. Generally, the safest place to stand during this whole mechanic is the very north center. It can still face some of these jumping bombs, but it's a lot less likely than most other places around the arena. If someone wants to flank though, they will have to watch out for any bombs that are around them and move accordingly. After Solak finishes with the jumping bombs, he's going to spawn a yellow dome on the north center of the arena. Any player can click on this yellow dome, and they get to commune with it, allowing them to spawn a shield using their secondary action button. The teammates that normally do this are the base tank, and sometimes an extra player who is doing DPS and is attacking from behind using flanking. However, this is very optional. The shield that the base tank or the other player spawns will last just long enough to defend against 5 projectiles that Solak will fire from the air that would do about 8,000 damage to players outside of the shield and about 2,000 damage to players inside the shield. You have to be pretty precise about the timing, however, as if you place the shield too early, your teammates will probably not be protected for the last hit or two, and if you place the shield too late, your teammates will get hit by the first hit or two. The shield should be placed just after Solak slowly raises his arm and back down before he does a quick auto attack though. Everyone on the team should gather around either the base tank or the DPSer who is designated to place the shield for the people who are trying to attack the boss from behind to use flanking, as the jumping bombs begin to subside. Teammates can run outside the shield to use resonance to get a big heal from any of these rain projectiles. However, they have to be sure to run back in if there are more projectiles to come. Also, they have to make sure that they time the resonance in order to not allow it to get sniped by a Solak auto attack. After the rain, Solak will try to instant kill a player. He'll grab a player, move that player to right in front of Solak, and try to slam his hand down, instant killing the player if the player does not manage this mechanic correctly. If Solak fails to instant kill the player though, his arm becomes stuck on the ground and Solak stops attacking. Someone can climb the arm and deal a deadly blow to Solak, reducing the percentage at the top by roughly 20%. To avoid getting instant killed, there's 2 main ways to do it. You can either use anticipation just after the shield from the rain attack disappears, or if you get grabbed, you can use freedom and then run away. If you do this too late though, freedom and then surge immediately or you are going to get instant killed very soon. If you do not react to this in any way, Solak might still not choose you anyway and it won't be a big deal. But if he does choose you and you are not ready for this mechanic, you 100% can get instant killed here. Someone can run up and climb Solak's grounded arm. Normally this is a base tank. Whoever does climb, though, should not use channeled abilities, as these can potentially stop your character from climbing the arm. If you do climb the arm and deal a deadly blow, though, Solak will hit you for about 3,000 melee damage, so you can choose to resonance it, or use another defensive, or even tank it praying melee if you want. During this time, everyone else on the team can actually attack the boss here and just pray Soul Split, because Solak will not do any other kind of attack during this mechanic. The most dangerous mechanic on Phase 2, however, is the Tornado. Solak will start spinning around rapidly and start shooting out a projectile similar to that you see at the rain. Except, the shield does not protect you during this. The only real way to defend against this mechanic is probably just use Barricade. I guess Reflect and Debilitate and maybe some more defenses will work, but Barricade is really the only useful option here. If this happens, your team better be ready to barricade, or your team is probably going to die and should teleport out here. Generally, this mechanic doesn't actually happen that often if your team has good DPS, however. After the tornado attack, Solak will give the players 2 sets of bombs, actually, that are exactly like the bombs that they were dealing with on Phase 1. So, the non-base tank will get bombs, and yeah, they need to step away from their teammates in resonance, as you would usually expect. Next, Solak will yell, "Frail creatures, it's time to die." And shortly after will spawn a bunch of roots in front of him. Generally, everyone should just run away from the front of Solak when he says this mechanic. If you don't, you're going to get hit with the roots similar to what you were dealing with on Phase 1. After Solak does the roots, he'll eventually restart his rotation all the way back to the jumping bombs. These jumping bombs can actually carry into Phase 3, which might make Phase 3 very unpleasant for your team. So what do you actually do on Phase 2? Now that we've explained all of the mechanics finally. On Phase 2, your team will start by running south, getting out of the middle as fast as possible. They'll start by attacking one of the 2, or both, of the south anima eruptions. As one of them gets very low, your base tank will click Marithiel, spawning a green light pillar that your whole team will stand in. You need to run into this green light pillar as fast as possible, and then everyone that is in the green light pillar should point towards whichever anima eruption just died or is about to die, and then surge over to that anima eruption as soon as you get a message about that cleanse. The blue light will eventually pull your characters up, and when that happens, spam click on the storm. Your team will get pushed back down and you will not be able to finish off the storm yet. All that you need to do now is your team needs to go up another time on another one of these anima eruptions, and then spam click the storm again. If this is all done correctly, it should only take 2 visits up to attack the storm and kill it. However, if your team has too many stacks, or one person didn't go up, or any other reason that your team didn't succeed in killing the storm in those 2 visits, they can run down back to the cell center, cleanse again, go back to another one of these anima eruptions, go up again after you kill it, and then kill the storm. After your team kills the storm, though, you can move on to killing off the remaining anima eruptions, and then stand at the north center. With jumping bombs, your character will just need to avoid any jumping bombs that are within 3 squares, and then after that, stand on the base tank, or if you want to flank, and your team has a designated person to spawn a shield for the flanking people, stand on the team member that is going to place a shield for the flanking people. Stay in the shield, and if you need to, you can jump outside in resonance, but otherwise stay in the shield, and then after the 5th rain hit, or after the yellow shield disappears, you can use anticipation. This should protect you from getting hit by Solak's arm, but if Solak faces you anyway and grabs you, freedom if you didn't use anticipation, but otherwise, run away from where his hand lands and just pray Soul Split and attack the boss. Your base tank will climb up and deal a deadly blow to Solak, and normally the fight will be over at this point. If it doesn't, your team should all gather together again, get ready to use another shield. In this case, there's only one more shield available, and then the shield will protect your team from the second rain attack. Almost certainly your team should be done with this phase, but if it doesn't happen, your team will need to get ready to use Barricade after this shield ends. After that Solak starts spinning around, your team should use Barricade altogether to defend against that, and then deal with the bombs as usual if that happens, and if Solak does the root attack, step away from the front of Solak. Generally, the tornado and afterwards rarely ever happen if your team has reasonable amounts of DPS and is dealing with the mechanics remotely correctly. So don't worry, if you're kind of concerned about those mechanics, they're very rare. When Solak's percentage bar under his HP bar gets to 0%, you are going to move on to Phase 3. Phase 3 is a far easier phase to do than Phase 1 and 2. There is only 4 mechanics instead of the God knows however many you were dealing with on Phase 1 and 2, and these mechanics are far more forgiving. On Phase 3, you'll face the pads, the mind, if you choose to, the root bombs, and the bleeds. Let's start off with the permanent pads. There are 8 of these permanent pads around the arena. Solak, standing over one of them long enough, charges the pads, and when the pad turns purple, Solak becomes stunned and shakes around violently and stops attacking. At the same time the pad turns purple, a little bomb explosion will happen that does about 2,000 damage to anyone within about 5 squares of the pad. Also, you can use your secondary action button to go inside the mind here, but only 2 people at a time can do this. It's important to note that the pads that are green, even when they're not charging, can still have a small bomb explosion seen by the same way that a pad that just turned purple would. This isn't actually that dangerous, it's just something you need to watch out for. These bomb explosions that the pads do will add 5 stacks to you as well. This mechanic is actually quite easy to deal with. If you want, you can actually tank the bomb explosions, although you can also use resonance to tank them as well, or you can run away from the pad a bunch to avoid getting more stacks. Either way, after that explosion happens, run back over to Solak and pray Soul Split and attack him. You get a lot of time to attack him here, so you can heal up probably to full HP. If you use your secondary action button here, you can go into the mind. Let's explain that mechanic. You will only be able to use a secondary action button to go inside the mind when Solak is shaking around after a pad just turned from green to purple. Inside the mind, you only get 18 seconds, and all you get to do is attack Eristor inside the center of the mind. It's important to note that Sardomin, Bruise, and Food do not heal inside here, so make sure you're not really low HP before you go in. Now, Eristor will only ever attack with ranged attacks, but the important thing to note is when he dies, Solak immediately moves on to Phase 4. Make sure that your team does not kill Eristor until after your team has reached Solak's HP cap outside. Otherwise, your team is probably not getting the kill. Only 2 people can go inside the mind, however, 1 person gets all the damage. So, if you're the person who goes inside the mind second and the other person has already picked up aggro of Eristor, you can actually just Soul Split and attack Eristor and continue healing here if you want. If you're the one taking damage though, you should probably pre-range, although you can probably get away with Soul Splitting, at least a little bit here. The Bleeds is one of 2 dangerous mechanics on Phase 3. Solak will raise his hand high onto the sky and then slam his hand onto the ground. Everybody who is not in the mind at this time will get a powerful bleed that very quickly starts doing a lot of damage. To clear the bleed, the players will need to stun Solak, and there's going to be more than one stun needed sometimes. To know how many stuns you need, you figure out how many players are on the arena and not inside the mind, and then half of those players rounded down would need to stun. So say you have 5 people outside attacking Solak, then 2 people will need to stun. It's important to note that one person cannot stun twice. It has to be 2 different people that stun. So this mechanic has to be taken care of as soon as possible. If someone goes into the mind or your team progresses to phase 4 before dealing with this mechanic, the bleeds will continue and will continue to get stronger. Very, very dangerous. Also, as soon as Solak applies the bleed, everyone on the team that was out around Solak will get stunned immediately for a second. There is only one way to deal with this mechanic, and that's everyone who is on the ground at the time Solak does this mechanic needs to use a stun. The final mechanic that is on phase 3 is the root bombs. 3 players who are doing DPS will get these bombs. They're similar to phase 1 in that they do the same amount of damage, and they have the same attack range and such. However, at the same time that these bombs explode, roots will spawn in a triangle formation between all the players that get these bombs. The roots will not affect the players who got the bombs themselves, but for any other players, they need to be not in between any of these players that got the bombs, because the roots can do some very serious damage. Also, bleeds can happen during this mechanic as well, which might become very dangerous. If you get a bomb, I recommend using Anticipation so that the bleed cannot stun you out of using your Resonance or whatever defensive ability you're planning on using here. Also, do not run to the middle or make the roots cross the middle when you get this bomb mechanic. To end phase 3, you have 2 options. You can either kill Eristor in the mind, or you can charge all 8 pads outside. Very important, but get Solak to the HP cap before you end phase 3. On phase 3, all you do is you attack Solak as much as you can. During the time Solak's shaking around, if you want, you can go use your secondary action button to go inside and attack Eristor. Just make sure you don't kill Eristor prematurely. Otherwise, you can stay outside and pray Soul Split and continue to attack Solak. When Solak gets back up from being stunned from one of the pads, you should start praying range again to continue to defend against his auto attacks. If he stuns, or if you see his hand slam on the ground, immediately use a stun as soon as possible. If you see an Adrenaline bar above your head, run away from your teammates and don't run towards the middle, run towards one of the edges of the arena, and try to make sure that there are not other players that can spawn in between you and any other teammates who got the bomb. In a 4-person or 3-person team, this generally isn't that big of a problem. Go inside when Solak's HP gets close to the HP cap to go and chip away at Eristor. And if Eristor is low and Solak's at HP cap, then you don't really need to do very much outside because you can't really do any damage at Solak, but do take every opportunity you can to kill Eristor as soon as possible. Phase 4 is by far the simplest phase. All you need to do is kill Solak before Solak's second HP bar goes to 0. If you can do this, you will have successfully gotten a kill. There's only a couple mechanics to deal with, the rain bombs and the mind. For the rain bombs, some of the players who are outside and attacking Solak will get bombs. These are similar to the phase 1 bombs, except when the bar fills up, Solak will not only do an explosion, he will also send a projectile that does about 8,000 damage from the sky, similar to one you've found from the rain shield mechanic on phase 2, if you do not stun him. All that you need to do against this mechanic is stun Solak as soon as you see an Adrenaline bar above either your head or an Adrenaline bar over your teammates' heads. You'll take a much smaller hit, only about 2,000 damage, and then the bomb will hit you, but you don't need to step away from your teammates in resonances. You just need to be away from your teammates if you can, and as long as your team has enough HP to survive these hits, just keep attacking. It isn't actually that important to deal with these mechanics that cleanly because Solak never auto-attacks you, which means you get to soul split the entire phase. The mind is a mechanic that the base tank is the only person to ever deal with. To go inside, your base tank will use a secondary action button, same way you did to go inside the mind on P3, and the base tank's job is not to do any damage at all. It's actually to pick up aggro of all the Eristor clones inside the mind that are trying to attack Solak. Whenever the base tank attacks an Eristor clone, the clone will immediately permanently switch its aggro over to the base tank unless the base tank dies. Now, the clones start to do increasing amounts of damage, so your base tank will have to use stronger and stronger defensive abilities to continue to take the larger amount of damage that he's going to take. It's important you don't kill any clones because they'll spawn outside and start attacking your teammates that are trying to kill Solak as fast as possible. Basically, your base tank is trying to buy your team as much time as possible by stalling out Solak as much as possible, and if your team is able to kill the boss before your base tank dies inside the mind, then your team will be able to get the kill. The base tank will also be able to heal Solak from inside, but you only ever do this after using Barricade because your base tank will take a lot of damage. Basically, on Phase 4, your team is going to do as much damage as it can to Solak while the base tank goes inside and tries to survive as long as possible inside the mind while aggroing all of the Eristor clones to keep Solak alive as long as possible. And if the DPSers outside are able to do enough damage, then the base tank will still be alive and your team will have gotten the kill. However, if your base tank dies and your team is not able to kill Solak before Solak inside the mines dies, your team gets instant killed and immediately fails the kill. Actually, if you die one tick before Solak dies in this boss fight, whether by a little bit of damage or your familiar does a little bit of damage and that makes a difference, getting Solak's HP down to 0, you will actually technically survive the kill. Weirdly enough. You can't depend on this happening because chances are you probably wanted to do a bit more damage and get the kill a little bit more comfortably. Now, let's cover the base tank role. The base tank role is going to actually do a lot of the similar stuff to what the DPSers do, except there's a few major differences. First major difference is Solak always attacks with melee instead of with ranged. And unfortunately, Solak's melee attacks always have 100% accuracy, which means unlike the range attacks, you are always getting hits when you're the base tank. This can take a lot more food because of that. Also, any of the bombs that you have to step away from your teammates and resonance often, such as on Phase 1, on Phase 2 at the very end, and Phase 3 and 4, the base tank doesn't ever get. So instead, they will be dealing with mechanics as usual. Finally, your base tank is generally in charge of where Solak goes. So wherever the base tank goes, Solak goes as well. Generally, if you're new to base tanking, you may want to bring a lot of food with you. Like, even if you use a Ripper normally fighting Solak as a DPS, at least on your first few kills, you probably will want to bring one as a base tank because you're going to take significantly more damage. Also, you may want to consider using abilities like Devotion and Resonance and Debilitate to help reduce the damage you take over time as you progress through the kill. Finally, equipment like Crypt Bloom or other effective tank armor might be also useful, reducing the damage you take overall. Now, from the base tank perspective, let's explain how Phase 1 works. On Phase 1, you get to start the kill. Do as much damage as you can pre-melee, and when the pads spawn, you have to run towards one of those pads and wait until it disappears. You're always within melee distance of the boss, so if you're going to try to time a Resonance or Disruption Shield, you have to wait until the melee attack hits you, and then use Resonance or Disruption Shield to tick after. Otherwise, Disruption Shield and Resonance or Devotion and Resonance work fine. At 50 seconds, you should run Solak either all the way north or all the way south, and the rest of your teammates should run in the other direction in order for them to get a chance to soul split. You go and attack the roots that are on the opposite side. If you have any set of roots that are coming from an arena, so any set of personal roots, you need to deal with them exactly the same way that the DPSers will. Then you won't get the bombs, so the DPSers should stay away from you, so you can just attack. Same with the arms, legs, and core, you just get to attack that as well. Phase 2 is probably the most complicated phase for you. As soon as the phase starts, run south and immediately start attacking one of the 2 southern animal eruptions. As soon as it gets low, click Merethiel and start the cleansing process. You and all the DPSers will stand in the green light, but as you do that, face towards the animal eruption that is either about to die or has just died. As soon as you get a message about being cleansed, surge into that blue light that spawns, and go up with the DPSers and spam click the core. Now, if one of the DPSers did not make it up here, Solak is going to change aggro to them. They should pray melee. However, for you, once you get back down, immediately Voke Solak as soon as possible, and the DPSer who was still down there should pray range again. You should go up one more time with your team. However, this time, if your team did a good amount of damage to the core, you can stay down and continue to hold aggro and just continue to attack other animal eruptions, thus keeping any other teammates from the danger of accidentally picking up aggro of Solak. Once the animal eruptions die, you run to the north center of the arena, and you just stay there unless you see a bomb force you out of there. After the jumping bombs finish, you grab the commune, and as soon as Solak puts his arm back down after raising his hand up slowly, place the shield. Stay inside the shield. However, at some point, you can run outside of the shield and use a resonance, the same way anyone else would. However, make sure you don't run Solak too far away, because you might accidentally pull some of the DPSers out of the shield unexpectedly, potentially killing them. After the shield, you should use anticipation, and then after Solak slams his hand on the ground, you run up the arm yourself, and then you want to do some abilities while you're running up there. You won't be able to let Revolution trigger any by itself, but you can manually activate a few. After you get back down, Solak's going to hit you for about 6,000 damage, so you can use a defensive ability, or you can just straight up tank it with praying melee. After that, get ready to pick up another shield again, because there's going to be another rain if the phase is continuing to go on. Use it again when Solak puts his hand back down after raising it up slowly. And then after that, field spawns. Be ready to use Barricade if you expect phase 2 to continue to drag on. When Solak does the tornado, you want to use Barricade as soon as possible. After the tornado happens, if the bombs happen, you just need to stay away from the DPSers. When Solak yells about the frail creatures, free them and then run away from Solak's front so you can avoid getting hit by the roots. You're the most likely one to have to worry about it. And then, hopefully, you get phase 2 done with. On phase 3, immediately put Solak over one of the pads. You want to start doing as much damage as you can, and when the pad turns purple, you can either surge away if you do not want stacks, or you can use resonance to heal from the pad explosion, and pray soul split and continue attacking Solak until he gets back up, after which you pray melee. If you see your teammates get any bombs, you need to run away from them. If you see Solak try to do the bleeds, you need to stun him as soon as possible. And unless you're in a duo, you should probably never go inside the mind and use your secondary action button. That is a job that only the DPSers should have. If you go in as a duo, the base tank should actually go in first, because then when the base tank comes out first, the base tank ends up with aggro, and thus the DPSer does not end up getting aggro of Solak. Either way, once Solak is very close to HP cap, if you have already charged up a lot of pads, then just charge up the rest of them to move on to phase 4. Or you can charge up a few more pads, and eventually your DPSers will be able to kill Aerithor, also moving into phase 4. Just, again, watch out for the stuns, as they can potentially mess up the kill. On phase 4, you kind of have two options. If your team is trying to do what is called a no-realm, you, the base tank, as well as all the other players, will just try to do as much damage as possible and kill Solak before the elves inside the mind kill Solak in there. The more standard way to do phase 4, though, is to use your secondary action button as soon as Solak runs back on phase 4. When you get into the mind, immediately use Immortality. When your HP gets relatively low, you want to use Reflect while Immortality is still up. And if you can, you want to let your character get reanimated by using Immortality. However, if Immortality's timer runs out and you still have Reflect, use Devotion if you're very, very, very low HP. After Reflect ends, immediately use Devotion, and then after Devotion ends, or very close to the end of Devotion, use Barricade and spam click on Solak. During the time, however, while you're using Immortality, Reflect, and then Devotion, you should click and target all of the clones inside the mind and not allow a single one of them to attack Solak directly, as this can potentially give your team far less time to attack Solak and try to kill him. If your team is slow to DPS, you may die in the mind, and if your team is too slow to DPS, they will die too. But it's kind of your job to try to last as long as you can and hold the clones as much as you can, unless your team has decided to teleport out because too many people have died on P4. There will be some times where you are the only one who died at Solak because your team managed to kill Solak just after you got killed inside the realm, saving the kill. That unfortunately comes with the territory. Here are some additional tips I will recommend before you do your first Solak kill. First one is get in a voice chat with your teammates. That way, you can call out what pad you're running towards, whether you have routes, and what time they're coming, and from what location, and any other things you may need to call out. Also, you can ask some questions if you are unsure about how you want to deal with certain mechanics, or how the team wants to deal with certain mechanics. The next thing I would recommend is that you and your team have the same goals for the kill. I have went with some teams that are trying to get route skips and such, which is very, very unfriendly for someone who may be just trying to get a kill for the very first time and learn the mechanics. Finally, your team should be as small as possible if everyone's learning. So if everyone's learning, one person should learn how to base tank and one person should learn how to DPS. That way, the smaller the team, the slightly less likely it is that your team will mess up a mechanic and potentially have to try again. Because unfortunately, this boss, especially when everyone's learning, will require a lot of trying again. If you're in a team that has a few experienced players, you might be able to get away with more than one learner, but I do recommend trying to go with a group of experienced players that is patient enough to take a learner, and unfortunately, not all of them are. Another thing I'll mention is that if you make a mistake or your team makes a mistake, continue going. As long as everyone's alive, do not give up on the kill and try to focus on whatever is going to come next. It's important not to panic whenever something goes wrong at Solak, because many times something will. and if you can get over that mistake, perhaps your team will still be able to get the kill despite it. Finally, I do recommend using a yak. I'm aware that a lot of teams that teach don't recommend using a yak, but to be honest, I do not believe in the same kind of PvM philosophy. I hope they help, and good luck in your kills. We've explained all the mechanics, now let's cover the loot. On average, Solak will drop about 13 million gold worth of stuff. Most of the money comes from either the small chance you get at getting a Blightbound, an offhand Blightbound crossbow, or a Grimoire, and one Torn Grimoire page, which is guaranteed every single kill. There are some other rare drops, however, and let's cover the drop rates for all the rare stuff and the pets. The drop rates for the Aristor's Grimoire, and then the Blightbound crossbow, and the offhand crossbow is all 1 in 200 each. For the Purple Mushroom and the Merethiel Staff Override is 1 in 500 each, and for the Ancient Elven Ritual Shard and Cinderbane Gloves is 1 in 1000 each. For the pets, Sully himself, the base drop rate is 1 in 1200, however the drop rate does improve at 240 kills. Also, at 1000 kills at Solak, regardless of whether or not you've gotten Sully, there's another pet that you unlock called Perdita. This pet you actually see next to Merethiel as you start the instance before you actually get into the arena itself. If you made it to the end of the video, I appreciate you watching all the way through. I know this has been a very long video. I think it's my first video that I've ever made that is over an hour long. I hope you did enjoy the video, and if you have any questions, please do feel free to drop them in the comments down below. I know I couldn't cover absolutely everything about Solak, but I did cover as much as I possibly could. I also run Solak sessions myself. If you want to learn how to do Solak for the first time, feel free to drop a follow on my Twitch channel, and I run Solak almost every stream, so feel free to jump on in and ask for an invite. I do not require any experience. Also, I do have a quick guide on how to do Solak as well, in case you're wondering how to do the boss with a more concise video. Either way, if you learned something or enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like on the video, comment down below what you learned or if you liked the video or any questions you have, and subscribe to